Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar, Where are the Women? Visibility of Women in Teaching Cases. My name's Carla Whitcomb, I'm a Senior Marketing Manager at Emerald Publishing and I'm working on our case study products. I'm delighted to be joined by some fantastic presenters today. We've got Lesley Symons, who's the founder of Case for Women, Lesley Symons, the CEO of Forte, and Gabby Rundle, who is our cases publisher at Emerald Publishing. I'll let them give you a little bit more information about themselves and their organisations when they present to you, but I'd like to welcome them and thank them very much for their time today. Together, we've created and launched the Case for Women competition to encourage and promote a home for cases with female leadership. And Gabby will talk you through the full submission criteria. And I'll hand over to Lesley very shortly to give you the background as to how this all came about and the research that was involved in it. So just some housekeeping before we get into the session. It'll last around 1 hour, including time for a Q&A at the end. We will be recording the session afterwards, so please feel free to share with your colleagues. At the moment, you're on mute, so if you would like to ask a question, there is a question pane in the bottom of the right-hand panel that you've got on your screen there. Please do ask questions as we go through, and we can save those till the end of the presentation. So right now I'd like to hand over to Lesley and look at her work to create the Case for Women.
Thank you. Thank you, Carla. Can you see my screen?
Almost.
It's okay. Show my screen. There we go. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Welcome everyone. Good morning, afternoon, good evening, good very early morning for some of us. Welcome to this webinar, and I feel very privileged to be sharing my research with you. And it's called Where are the Women? The Visibility of Women in Business School Case Papers. And we're really about trying to create transparency to improve the balance of genders in business school case papers. So just before I go into this, just how did this start? I was a businesswoman. I went to a business school in France, INSEAD, and when I was on the campus, I recognized that there were fewer women around than men. But then I went into my modules, and even though my classroom actually had 50-50 men to women in it, what I noticed was that the first module was module 5 of 8, where I had a woman in front of the classroom. And in fact, the whole 8 modules, I had 2 women. And then the other thing I noticed was before each module, I was given case papers to read, and I was thinking, where am I? I can't see myself. No women in these papers. And in fact, the first and only paper we got with a women leader was on the last module, and it was in organizational behavior, and it was around a woman doubting her leadership style. So that's when I went, right, I've got to find out for my thesis, what is the propensity of women in business school case papers? And as I started reading, what I realized was just the lack of women totally. So first of all, a poll question for you all. We would love to know who you are. So do you, first of all, teach papers? Do you write papers? Do you read papers? Or all of the above or none of the above? I believe that you've got a poll now. Please, we'd love you to answer those questions. Teach papers, write papers, read papers, or none of the above? And I think we're back. And let's see. I can't see what I can't see, Carla, what the maybe you can tell us what the results are.
I can. So we've got 10% teach, 22% write, 22% read, and 46% are all of the above. So we got 0, none of the above.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm hoping for all of you that there might be something you get out of this presentation that will help in your writing or your teaching of papers or reading them as well. So what am I going to do with today's presentation? So basically, I'm going to deliver the research results. I'm going to deliver the meaning for schools and female students out of those results. And finally, what are the lessons that we've learned at the Case for Women in reading all of the papers? And there might be some prep in there for the case competition too. So why is this topic interesting and worth studying? And I think most of you will know this. There's more and more women as company leaders and on boards. Business schools play an integral role in developing those leaders for the future. It's a topic of current debate. There are more and more women entering business schools than ever before. And it gives some sort of sense of the underlying messages to women and men at business schools. So why this research as well? When I started the research, I found the European Business School and European Commission Call to Action report. And it basically states similar things to also the White House Council of Economic Advisors issued a White House paper basically saying that business schools played a vital role in achieving gender diversity and leadership, and recommended increasing men's awareness of gender issues by revising the teaching materials. So that helped me, the impetus in writing this. So basically, go back, we're going to have a poll question. Who's heard of either of those two papers? So the European Business Review or the White House White Paper? Love to know who's heard of them. Carla, I'll leave it up to you.
Yep, so we've got 24% had heard of them and 76% hadn't.
Okay, so my suggestion there is probably the most interesting one to read is the White House White Paper. Obviously, that was written in the Obama era, so things have changed a little bit since then, maybe. But that's an interesting report and can easily be got online. And it's got some, maybe some interesting things that you can use at your school. So my research context, basically, we looked at the case centre case papers, and I'll go into that in more detail in a moment. And we looked at that because it's part of the learning mix for an MBA student. The research and analysed how women are portrayed in case papers. And at the time, I also looked at it in the context of women building a leader identity at business schools. Because often they talk about when you go to a business school and you do an MBA, it's a time for a student to play or look at their leadership style and in a safe space. And I wanted to look at whether that was appropriate really for women. So the case centre papers researched, we've got 10 years, and in fact we have got 11 years now. We've done 2019. For those of you that don't know, the case centre run awards each year. There are 10 awards each year, and they're for the papers that are most widely distributed. They're very highly prized by business schools, and it was these papers that I read. Only 99 because there's one paper that won over 2 years. I also cross-referenced that with what they call their best-selling case papers. I took the top 3 best-selling case papers. Best-selling means literally the amount of volume that they sell. And the reason there's only 6 is because the same best-selling papers are the same best-selling papers every year, which I think is, something to think about, because over 10 years, they're the same papers. So 105 different cases in total, different case papers. So this is what I found. 103 of the papers mention a man. 70 papers mention a woman, and I'll go into that more in a moment. However, in the case for women, we believe only 47 papers really have a woman present. So what does that mean? That means that she's in a role that's integral to the paper and to the business. And she's not it's not mentioned as a she, her name is mentioned or a position is mentioned. And also, she's not, for instance, in a lot of papers, there's models, and also she's not from a marginalized community. 35 papers, women are not mentioned at all. There's not a woman in the paper. So a poll question now for you again. Just knowing that piece of research, how many female protagonists do you think that there are across these 105 papers? And the choices are 6, 12, 20, or 25. 6, 12, or 20, or 25.
So we had 40% of people think it was 6, 46% think it was 12, 8% think it was 20, and 6% think it was 25.
Okay, fantastic. So let's find out. I think you're all pretty close. Of the 105 papers, 83 have a male protagonist, 12 have a female protagonist. However, of the 12 female protagonist papers, only 10 papers were originally women. That's because one professor wrote 3 papers, and when I actually wrote to him and asked him about this, he said, "Sorry to disappoint you, Lesley, but of those 3 papers, the 2 papers were originally men, but I recognized that my female students were not getting role models, so I changed their names." Needless to say, he did not change their descriptors. And in 6 papers, 6 of those 12 papers, she is the only woman among many men in those papers. So I just wanted to go through just the women in the papers first, because what we've noticed over time in reading these papers, that the area that is being improved is the number of female characters in papers. So what we're seeing is that I think after this research, and also it being a topic of debate in schools, that's an easy place for us to for women to get put into papers. So if you look at 2009 to 13, 55% of the papers had a woman in them. And then if you go 14 to 18, 79%, and then much more recently, 90% of papers had a woman in them. It could only be one woman, but that, you know, is great. It's better than earlier on. So let's now look at the women protagonists and how that's gone over time. And sadly to say, that's gone the other way. So up until 2013, we had 13%. And then nothing has changed since 2014. 10% of papers have a female protagonist. It is changed, I believe, in 2019, although the case for women will debate, we will debate that. So let's have a look at the number of characters, women versus men. Generally, men still outnumber women by 5 to 1 in these papers. I don't know about you, but I'm getting a bit of feedback here. I'm not sure. So let's have a look at the themes. Invisibility of women, leaders, no role models, and these are some of the themes I pulled out. Pink topics or places of work, and I'll go through that. The prevalence of men, or the think manager, think male syndrome, the Virginia Shine work, and again, I'll go through that. And the no interaction of women with women about the business. So first, let's look at the invisibility of women. And what we did was take what we call the Mo movie test, or the Bechdel test, which is a test that's still going. And it's a way of measuring women's presence in movies. If you haven't heard of it, look it up. And they're still measuring movies by this test online. And basically the test says it has to have 2 women in it who talk to one another about something besides a man. So I looked at that and I sort of turned it around, called it the Symons test. And what we had was it has to have a woman in it, which we're beginning to see, who is the protagonist or the leader who speaks to another woman about the business. And why did we do that? Because first, number one, it encourages more women to appear in case papers, which is beginning to happen, which is fantastic. Second, it encouraged women to be shown as leaders in middle or senior management and up to C-suite. And finally, it encourages or ensures that she is not the only woman in the paper among many men. So if we look at the Symons test, under the case center papers, 70 have a woman in them, 12 where she is a leader, and then sadly, there are 4 papers where she speaks to another woman about the business. Let's look at our next theme, pink topics. The op-ed report. This is a report out of the US, which basically measures where women are written in print, where female writers are published. And generally they fall into the 4 Fs, although I believe they've added a couple of additional areas now, but they're basically fashion, food, furniture, or family. So they're women-focused subject matters, no less important than in any other subject matter, but that is majority of the places that women are published. And if we look at the papers, 10 out of the 12 female protagonist papers fell into one of the pink topics. The largest sector for male protagonists was and is IT and mobile communications. And now if we look at the think manager, think male syndrome, I don't know whether any of you know the Virginia Shine research that has been duplicated. She did it with MBA students and basically asked men and women to describe descriptors for a manager and a leader. And what she found is that over and over again, we describe a leader or a manager with what we call male descriptors. Hence, when we subconsciously think of a manager, we see in our mind's eye a man. So if we look at the 105 papers, 103 of them have a man in it, at least one man, many more. 83 have a male protagonist. And I would also add there's a lot of papers that also have a male founder, and he gets a lot of airtime. And some of the descriptors are tough but fair, results-driven, father figure. We have 12 female protagonist papers, and 11 of those 12 papers of female protagonist papers, she's not described. Her qualities are not described at all. Let's have a look at the writers of these papers. That's the other area that we wanted to find out. And basically, if you look at the primary writers, predominantly male, and secondary writers, much more even. So both men and women writers are not writing about women. For the 27 female writers, only 2 papers had women leaders. For the 116 male writers, only 10 papers have a woman leader. And papers written by women have no women in them. So then once I'd finished doing this research, one of the things I wanted to do was to look at what are students reading across an entire program. I wanted to look at an entire MBA program and see, you know, over a year or 2 years, what is the cumulative effect of what they're reading? And I needed help. And I instantly contacted Alyssa at the Forte because I believe her values and Forte's values are very much in alignment with the Case for Women, wanting more women into leadership, more women into business schools. And Alyssa immediately jumped at this and helped by helping with funding and also helping with connections and getting us into some schools. She also introduced me to Jeff at the MBA Roundtable, and they also funded and helped get the schools on board to look at some of their case papers. So what I wanted to do was get an understanding of what students are seeing and reading across the life of a degree. What we did is we researched case papers of 7 prominent US business schools, and we read them from the MBA core curriculum, and we read over 600 school case papers. What we did is we benchmarked against the Symons test, just to give us some idea of comparison against the schools. And this is what we came up with. So if we look there, you've got the individual schools scores. So that's the percent of case papers with women in them, ranging from 42% up to 70%, 71% there. Little bit similar to the case center. In terms of women protagonists in these papers, most of the schools are doing far better than the case center papers. And then if you get to a woman speaking to another woman, about the same. Apart from one school, which you will see there at school 7, who has 70% women in papers, 29% protagonists, and 20% women speaking to women. They've done a concerted job at looking at their papers, and it just shows you what you can do when you focus on it. So just against the case center papers, 50% to 67% with women in them, more protagonists in the school papers, but very even in the Symons test. So again, we're still getting lone women in these papers. So lessons for the future and what we learned from this process. So what we realized quite quickly is that we needed to hire more researchers to help us read these 600+ papers. And what we've also realized from ourselves that gender bias presents in everybody to some extent. And the researchers needed to be able to accurately identify and record results. And so we needed a careful design selection process. And this is what we did, and this is what we found. So we advertised as a researcher into gender bias, and we advertised this mainly in the UK. What was interesting out of that, our applicants were 91% women, 9% men, even though the UK population is that. And so that sort of tells us a little bit about, I think once you mention gender and gender bias, it naturally attracts women rather than men. So there's something about how you present, you advertise your research. These are the applicant qualifications. As you can see, pretty equal between master's and bachelor's degree. We had some with no degree and one with a PhD. And this is what the process we used. We asked them to read a short case paper, 9 pages long. We asked them to count the number of characters. We asked them to identify their genders. And in the paper, there were 2 doctors in the paper, and their genders were unidentifiable. This is what happened. 73% missed at least one character, and in fact, half missed more than half the characters. 42% assumed the doctors were male, and in fact, one female applicant wrote, "I've decided to consider Dr. Smith and Dr. Brown as male in the absence of a general rule." And only 4 successfully identified all 10 characters correctly and said the doctors' genders were not determinable. Out of interest, this is the split of GPs in the UK. There's actually more female GPs in the UK than male. So these are the 6 things that we've really learnt out of doing this research. If you intend to do this research and, perhaps look at your core curricula, I think that some of these things need to be just looked at first. You have to select your researchers very carefully, and you have to design some sort of process up front to find out what biases or what, how they are as researchers on this topic. Gender bias influences the accurate analysis of papers. Many people will miss even the obvious characters. What we've learned is reading too many papers in one day definitely increases inaccuracy. We check everything, what we've discovered, we have to check everything by a second person. And Donna and I are our main researchers, and we still do that with each other. And I can't impress enough how schools should be looking annually at reviewing their core case paper list. So what could this research and all that we've done mean for students? Papers really show what we call second-generation gender bias, or show that the sort of informal hidden rules, which could say few women in leaderships, which means we're an exception to women. It shows strong female stereotypes, not many women leaders or management. It also, when you've got papers with only one woman in them and she's a leader, it could say that she doesn't promote women, and we know that's not true. It shows pink areas of work. and no female leader role models. And it shows male-dominated hierarchies. Managers think male leadership styles. Men sponsor men. Most papers have a lot of men in them, so it could show that men advocate for other men. And it also shows inflexible work structures or structures that favour men. And what this could do for women is the double bind effect, as I'm sure you all know, that management is masculine. So if she becomes more of a manager, she's respected but disliked. And if she remains herself, she's liked but not respected. What we also know is if you're a lone woman or women are in lower numbers, that means they're highly visible. And visibility increases stress and reduces the motivation of women wanting to lead. There's also potential identity conflict between her identity as a woman and her identity as a leader. And there's lack of networks, which leads women to believing we're not welcome here, we're not equipped to lead, obstructs us from developing and practicing and learning because we're highly visible. It validates entrenched systems, and it might not be a safe place for women to experiment and develop their leadership style. So what could this mean for business schools? No examples of different ways of leading. Prevents learning for men and women about the value of both genders as leaders. Business schools are not leading the debate on the different forms of leadership. And organisations who want to balance their boards and management are not seeing business schools modelling the way. And so finally, some reflections for you and key themes to be aware of, perhaps in your case writing. And these are really questions to challenge you and to get you to think about. How are students reading your papers? What could be the subliminal or hidden biases or messages that could be in them? What descriptors are you using for male and female characters, if any? Are women speaking to other women in the business about the business? And what is your balance of characters? Does it actually represent today's typical workplace? And a leader need not be a CEO or an MD or a board member. And how does your teaching note reflect your case paper and vice versa? So I've read a case paper recently which states that it has a female protagonist, which you would not pick up at all when reading the case paper. And in fact, you would think it was a male protagonist. However, the teaching note is very skewed to the female character in the paper. But as a student reading it off without seeing the teaching note, you wouldn't know that. Is there any discussion or topic about gender in the teaching note? And does there need to be? Does gender play a role here, or as an under the surface bias? And how comfortable are you with this topic? And do you need learning in this area? And finally, questions for you in terms of what can you do to support the change? What do you think and feel about this topic? What are your biases? Do you know? Do you present papers or text with women leaders in them? Have you noticed this before? Are your students seeing female professors, female students, female board members, and papers and text with women leaders or women in them? Is your classroom a safe space for women to speak up and show their talents? Is there a debate about different leader styles and gender? Is there a debate about gender balance in business? And is there a discussion on how male qualities seem to pervade business leadership texts? And are they getting education on second generation bias? And last, but by no means least at all, questions for your institution, which I'd like to leave you with, is do you have gender initiatives? Is the debate happening, and who is leading it? Is it left to the women to lead this? Is it an important part of the schools or the university's values, and is it lived? And finally, thank you. Where are the women? Visibility of women in business school case papers. Please give us feedback. I thank you for your time, and I thank you, Forte and Emerald, for supporting this. I hand you back to Carla.
Great, thank you so much, Lesley. That was really great. We had a few questions come in during that presentation, but I will just hand over to Alyssa, I think now, just to talk about Forte, and then we can take all of those questions at the end. And Gabby's just got a very quick slide on how you can submit to the competition. So I will just, okay. So I'm just
great, thank you.
Getting the slides ready for you, Alyssa. Is that okay?
That's great. Thank you very much. And thanks, Lesley, for walking us through your invaluable research. And it has been a pleasure partnering with the Case for Women. And we're so thrilled to be joining up with Emerald Publishing. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Forte and what we're doing to address some of the many inequities and issues that Lesley brought to our attention. I'm Alyssa Sangster, and I'm the CEO of Forte. I've been with the organization since its inception and working on how we can change the balance of power in the workplace. And ultimately, that's what we hope to see, is a shift in the gender balance in the corporate world, and that we start to see more women rising to the top in these leadership positions. We are a consortium of business schools and companies, undergraduate institutions, corporate partners, all coming together in an alliance to work on addressing this problem. So we have 41 MBA programs in the US that we work with, 10 institutions, MBA programs in Europe, and then 3 in Canada. So we're a global organization, even though we are based in the US. And we have, we can go on to the next slide, but I'll just say we have really seen some of these numbers shift. The first one is the enrollment in MBA programs. And so when Lesley and I were able to connect and talk about how the research she had done could impact the class makeup and the attention on gender in the classroom at these business schools, we just thought it was such a great step to take. And I'll point out why, because this first gray floor at the top left, the 39% of MBA women enrolled in business schools is a composite number of all of our 54 institutions. And it's highlighting that we're still not at 50-50, but we have seen this number increase greatly over the last 15 years. We started at 28% women enrolled in business school, and we are now seeing that number at 39%. And that number is important because I think it specifically ties back to what Lesley is saying, that if we are bringing more women into these MBA programs, but yet the education they're receiving and the inspiration and the role models and the different case papers that they're reading, if those are highly male dominated, then these women are not seeing those role models that they need to see in order to envision themselves as the leaders of the future. So it was a really great fit that we moved forward with this research support with the Case for Women. There's a couple of other numbers there. You can see that we have some a great amount of work to do to improve all of these numbers. We're thrilled that the 39% has been moving, but there's still at the top a lot of room for improvement. 7% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. I think this looks quite similar as you go across the globe. We've also got the S&P there. The gender pay gap, this varies by country and by region of the world, but by and large, around a 20% pay gap. And then venture funding. So when we start looking at entrepreneurial efforts, women are woefully underfunded and given access to capital to start these new ventures. So all of these numbers can use some improvement, but the one number we're quite proud of is this 39%. But obviously, if we're bringing it into the classroom, we also want to see those case papers reflecting female leaders. So a bit more about Forte. We are over 100,000 women across the globe who are rising in business. And it's a combination, as I mentioned, of our companies, our undergraduate and business school talent, and then the women who make up all of these, make up all of our constituents in the 100,000 plus. You can go into the next slide. And so what we're trying to do is really help these women to reimagine what's possible. There are just all kinds of opportunities in business, and very often there's a misperception about what kind of career paths lead to business leadership. And we really try to open up all of those possibilities for women, from healthcare to hospitality to finance. And we want them to see that the many multifaceted careers that you can have in business. We also want to accelerate their career. So we want to give them access. We want to give them the education that they need, provide those role models. And we have a whole series of role models that we do where we highlight different women who have achieved amazing things in their different careers, but really showing how they've come from maybe something, an undergraduate studies in liberal arts, and now they're in finance, or maybe now they're an entrepreneur, and really show what that journey looks like for women. We want to give them the access to those role models and also the professional networks they need, and then any kind of leadership training that we can offer them as well. And then one of the other things that's also very difficult for women is pursuing higher education. Everybody knows there's a concern about undergraduate debt, especially here in the US. There's a high price to that. And as they're thinking about going back to graduate school, that can impact their enrollment in an MBA program. And so helping them find this financial support. So one of our requirements of all of our schools that partner with us is that they provide these fellowships to women. And that is one of the reasons we've seen these numbers of MBA women, women enrolled in MBA programs grow from 28 to 39%. So again, the Forte community, this is showing you, maybe click one more. I think the graphic hasn't popped up, or I'm not seeing, there it goes. So over 100,000 women are in this community, and this just gives you a bit of a snapshot of where they are in their career. So we work, as I mentioned, with college students, university students, all the way through post-college, no MBA or post-MBA. And so it's a pretty significant population there that's in post-college with no MBA. This means they're ranging anywhere from 18 all the way up to 55. And the next slide. And this is the final slide I'll share, just to show a little bit of our reach in our program. So I've mentioned the three kind of core audiences, these college or university women, early career women, and then MBA women. And we're trying to work with each of them in different ways, giving them the support they need at the time of their career stage that they are in, either seeking education or looking for kind of that next step in the early career pipeline. You know, how can they consider the MBA? So we do any combination of online programming, conferences. Right now, obviously, all of our events have gone virtual. So we are in the process of delivering an MBA Women's Leadership Conference that will take place in June. And that conference usually has about 650 women who attend, and we closed early registration on Friday with 1,400 women registered across the globe for that event. So we're thrilled that we're reaching as many people as we are, and we'll see how we can continue that as we move back into kind of normal event type activities. But there's just such a strong interest to access programming like this, and so it's one of the things that we're most proud of, is all of the different kinds of events and engagements that we offer women that give them the inspiration and the education that they need. So there's a great deal more on our website, fortefoundation.org. So if anybody would like more information on what we're doing, please go and visit there. But again, it's just been a pleasure to partner with the Case for Women, and especially with Emerald Publishing, to have this case writing competition come to fruition. And we hope that you'll be encouraged to also participate and submit case papers. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. I will just hand over to Gabby at this point, just to take you through the logistics of submitting to the case competition, and then I will take some questions. We've had a few come in so far. Okay, so Gabby, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, thanks, Carla. Thank you, Lesley and Alyssa, for your presentations. They're both really interesting. So I'm Gabby Rundle, and I'm the cases publisher at Emerald. So I'm just going to talk very quickly through the submission process for the case competition. My email address is on there, so I will talk through this, but if there are any questions that you think of after the webinar or we didn't get to at the end, do put me an email across on that email address there. So the competition is open for submissions now. The deadline is the 1st of September. The total prize fund for the competition is $10,000, and prizes will be awarded to the overall winner and the first 2 runners-up of the competition. Submissions are made by emailing, you can either email my personal email address or thecaseforwomen@emerald.com. That's thecaseforwomen@emerald.com. And the documents required to enter the competition, you need to have 4 attachments. You will need the case study as a Word document, and the teaching note is a separate Word document to that. And ideally, both of these would have no author identifiable information on them. So if they could be anonymous, that would be great. And then also a case study consent form and a submission form, and all of these are downloadable on the Emerald, the Case Women competition page on the Emerald website. But again, if you're unsure where to find anything, do send me an email across and I can send these over to you. So for the technical requirements for submission to the competition, all cases should be teaching cases based on a real situation in a real company with a clear decision-making situation. The case studies submitted should not have been published in a current or substantially similar form previously, and they shouldn't be under consideration for publication in any ISSN or ISBN registered publication during submission. All cases which are submitted to the judging panel will be published in our e-case collection. So by participating in the competition, you're automatically agreeing to have your case study and the teaching note published in the collection on a non-exclusive basis. So on acceptance of your case study, we'll be in touch with a non-exclusive license agreement with the authors to complete prior to publication. All case studies need to be accompanied by a consent to publish release form, which has been completed and signed by the management of the company or individuals that are included in the case. And the cases must be accompanied by a teaching note, as I mentioned, and this should include a summary of the case, the teaching objectives and the target audience of the case study. It should include a suggested teaching approach and strategy, and it should include a discussion of the implication of gender issues and leadership in the case. And then it should also include any additional readings or references. And then we also require these cases to be classroom tested. And obviously at the moment that might mean that that's not in an online environment, that's completely fine. But we'd like the teaching notes to include feedback on how the case worked in a classroom, whether that be a physical classroom or a virtual classroom, that's fine. And then there's some additional criteria as to kind of the discussion of gender in the case. So all cases need to have a female protagonist. Her characteristics as a leader should be described in a generally positive way. We want case studies to have a general balance of genders across the characters included in the case. So it doesn't need to be precise, but we do want there to be kind of roughly 40-60 gender split generally included in the case study. the female protagonist should speak to another woman about business. So it should meet the requirements that Lesley mentioned when she was talking about doing her analysis into award-winning case studies that kind of similar to the Bechdel test on teaching cases. So the female protagonist needs to speak to another woman in the case study about the business. And then finally, and this isn't a mandatory requirement, but ideally the industry of the case shouldn't fall into one of the 4 F categories. And so that's food, family, fashion, and furniture. So like I said, it's not a mandatory requirement, but we just kind of prefer it if it wasn't a kind of more traditionally female focused industry. So I think that's everything. But like I said, if there are any kind of further questions after this webinar, do get in touch on that email address. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Gabby. And when we send the recording round, we'll also send a link to that page as well, so that you can see all of those criteria as well. So I will just hand over to any questions at the moment that you have. I'm conscious that we've only got around 5 minutes for this, so it may be that we don't get to all of them right now. We will definitely respond personally to each of the questions that you've asked afterwards. So the first question that we got, this was, Lesley, around the papers that you used for the MBA roundtable. Are any of the papers from companies in emerging countries or developing countries? So the papers that you looked at.
I think very few, to be honest, because obviously we looked at the papers we read were across US business schools. There were some, but few, I would say.
Okay. And then we've got a question here that is, what is the minimum length of the case study, and should it be industry specific, or can it be on social impact? So I think maybe that's one for you, Gabby. Is there a minimum length of the case study?
I would say minimum length. We're quite open. We do publish shorter case studies. I would say minimum of 1,000 words. If so, there wouldn't that's a quite short limit anyway. So I think no to word count. And then, sorry, the other question on.
Does it have to be industry specific?
What do you mean?
Not quite sure what that person means by that. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry. Right. So if you don't mind maybe clarifying what you mean by industry specific or on social impact. Again, if we don't get to that, we can send you a written response to that afterwards.
Can I just say something? Can I say something here? Can I come in?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's Lesley. I mean, personally, I don't think it does matter that much how long the case paper is. Obviously, it can't be a page. It probably needs, I think, when we've looked at shorter, cases, they've been about between 5 and 10 pages. But I think it's as long as it gets across what we need to hear and what you want to get across in terms of learning outcomes. I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think as long as the case kind of covers everything required for the classroom discussion, I think 1,000 words is probably a good minimum to bear in mind. I think any case that does kind of result in the kind of gender discussion would probably be at least that anyway. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Cool. And the question for you, Lesley, do you think Jacinda Ardern will become an archetypal persona for leadership in women in time to come?
That's a very personal question. Since I'm sitting in Australia at the moment, I think she's done a pretty good job. And actually, female leaders around the world at the moment are doing a pretty good job with COVID. But yes, she's showing us some different ways of leading. she's quite strong, but she's also very kind and empathetic. So yeah, I think she's a great role model for us all. I really do.
Yeah. Yes, someone's just asked if they can get these criteria, but yeah, that's fine. We'll send that all around afterwards. And a question here, should the case writers be female only, Gabby?
No, we have no restrictions on the gender of the authors at all. So no, and you know, obviously a lot of these submissions, I imagine, are going to have a number of co-authors. So we have no limit on who can submit, or if there are a number of authors, what the gender balance of that needs to be. So no, not at all, no limits on that whatsoever.
Okay, and we just got a bit of clarification on that question. It was, does it have to be a for-profit company, or can it be a social enterprise that you write about?
So again, we have no limits on that. Lesley, I don't know if you want to.
No, I think go for it. Go for it. If you've got something that, again, tells the story and gives great learning, go for it. I think it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Let's show it.
Yep, definitely. Thank you.
Fabulous. And then probably just got time for one really quick question, which is, can I just use secondhand material to write the case?
I think we are, Lesley, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we are allowing some cases if it is secondary material to be submitted. We just tend to find that cases where primary research has been carried out tend to be more engaging for students, and I think if it's at all possible for an author to conduct primary research, I think that tends to result in a more engaging kind of, the protagonist kind of comes across as a more kind of personal character within the story. But I think we are allowing submissions to this based on secondary data.
Yes, agreed.
Great, thank you. So sorry, we didn't quite get to all of your questions, but as I said, we'll follow those up. We'll send you around the criteria, the link to the recording of this webinar, and a look at the slides as well. So you should have everything that you need. Once again, I'd just like to say thank you so much to Lesley, to Alyssa, and to Gabby for joining us today. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming and for your contributions. For joining in with the poll and for your really thoughtful questions. It's very much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks
everyone. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. Have a good day, everyone.